you would embarrass me to a degree, because these were like, you know, the budding new thoughts of a confused engineer planner trying to figure out the world around him. One of the people that kind of was pushing me and prodding me was Mike. And when he got a hold of me and said, hey, we're doing this new thing, would you come down and be part of it? I couldn't say no. So thank you for your help in getting me started, and hopefully I can help you get started here. A little bit about us. We are a nonprofit 501c3 based out of Minnesota, but we work nationally. Our mission is to support a model of growth that allows America's towns to become financially strong and resilient. This presentation is called the Curbside Chat. It's our public outreach effort. There's three big takeaways from this, and I'll start with these and I'll end with these. The first is that the current path that cities are on is not financially stable. The second, the future for most cities will not resemble the recent past. And the third, the main determinant of future prosperity for cities will be the ability of local leaders to transform their communities. Now, I talk about cities. Our organization is called Strong Towns. I don't know if you guys have parishes or boroughs or whatever kind of local government you have. What we're really talking about are local units of government. We could have named our organization Strong Local Units of Government. That would have been a really long website address. We went with Strong Towns. If I go back and forth, I talk about towns, I talk about cities. What I'm really talking about are the base governmental unit that we use to govern our day-to-day affairs. I want to step you back in history. And this is a little bit of the kind of thing that you get in planning school. If you look back at the way we have built places for thousands of years, you see some things that are kind of eerily similar. This, on the left, the top left here, is an artist's rendering of the ancient city of Ur. Ur was in the Fertile Crescent. We've excavated it. It's about 6000 BC. This is what people believe it looked like. Of course, on the right there you have ancient Rome, the Colosseum, the Circus Maximus. If you look at these places, you see very similar, and look at other places around the world that were built really in this time and thousands of years since. You have a certain layout and scale that is very similar. The building materials might be a little bit different. The way they build monuments might be a little bit different. But the size and the scale of the cities, the way buildings are spaced, the way certain buildings are placed, the way the public realm is framed, generally the way that these places are laid out and built is very, very similar across cultures, across civilizations, and across time for thousands and thousands of years. In fact, if you look at, and this is my hometown back in 1900, you see many of the same elements, different materials, different architectural styles, but the same basic layout, design, and geometry. We're taught in planning school that this is the way we built because the primary mode of transportation of the day was walking. You got around everywhere by walking. And so our cities were scaled to people that walked. They were scaled so that all of the things you would need in an average normal day you could get to by walking. And then that walk was, the way that buildings were laid out, the way the public realm was framed, all those things were based on a culture of people who walked. And so there's a natural progression that we're taught as planners and engineers that, of course, when the technology changed, the way that we built would change. The way that we would build our places now is going to be based around the new technology today, the automobile. And so in response to this, we developed different building types, different building styles, different ways of laying things out. We came up with zoning to separate different uses, and we came up with a whole new kind of concept and idea about how to arrange places. It's a very comforting narrative that we tell ourselves as Americans, that this is just kind of the natural progress of humanity. We used to walk, we built cities one way, we now drive, we build them a different way. Someday we will have jet cars and we'll build them a different way, and then someday we'll have teleportation and we'll live completely differently than the way we do today. That's a very comfortable narrative for us. The reality, and there's a different kind of way to look at this, When you look at the traditional development pattern, you look at the way we built for thousands and thousands of years, what you're seeing there is a pattern based off of human trial and error experimentation. We literally tried things, figured out what worked, and that's what was built. And it's little kind of mystery that you can go to the civilizations of South America, North America, Asia, Africa, the Fertile Crescent, wherever you can dig up civilizations thousands of years old. They look very, very similar. They're scaled very much in a similar way. That's what worked. What we're doing today, on the other hand, is a very young experiment. We are literally creating a development pattern that has not only never been tried before on the scale we've done it, but is untested and unproven. And we're only 60 years into this, a blink of the eye, in comparison to the thousands of years of accumulated knowledge that our ancestors had when they built places. This is a very, very young experiment. So what we're going to talk about tonight are some of the things, particularly the financial ramifications of the way we are building that maybe wasn't apparent when we began this experiment 60 years ago. If you go back 60 years and you look at the way we used to build cities and finance growth, it was pretty much a local undertaking. If we wanted jobs at the local level, that was going to be us that came up with those. If we wanted a road paved, if we wanted a sidewalk put in, if we wanted a new sewer line, we were going to have to figure out a way at the local level to do that. That was our responsibility. After World War II, that changed. And as part of this suburban experiment, as part of this post-World War II experiment in building, we developed new methods to create growth at the local level. Growth at the local level is driven today largely by three different mechanisms. The first being transfer payments between governments. This is the idea that the state and the federal government have a role in creating and inducing growth at the local level. That maybe is an investment in a water system or a sewer system. Maybe it's an investment in a road or street or public building. The Department of Transportation, the idea that if we can build transportation improvements, be they highway or rail or whatever they are, that those could be funded from a collection of our dollars distributed through the federal and state governments. And those investments would in turn create and induce growth at the local level. And then third, we have debt. Certainly, public sector debt has gone up. We spend at the local level and borrow money at the local level to induce growth and create development opportunity. If you go back to 1950, the average city spent 2% of their budget on debt service. Today, that is 18% and rising. But even more importantly than public sector debt, we're really talking about private sector debt. The ability of developers to come in, make large leveraged investments, developing large tracts of property, be able to sell those off in terms of mortgages or commercial real estate loans. These three mechanisms of growth are all new post-World War II. The size and scale of them are certainly new. We use them every day to create growth at the local level, and that increases our tax revenue. If you look at these three mechanisms of growth, there's some very powerful incentives to look at all development as a positive from a financial standpoint. And in fact, we can see in our communities many times when developments are opposed, people say, I don't want that, or that's not the kind of development we want. The other side of the equation is always about what? Growth in the tax base and jobs. Growth in the tax base and jobs. This is the kind of pattern of how we create wealth at the local level. And the reason why this narrative is so powerful is that when the federal government makes an investment locally, or the state government makes an investment locally, or the DOT comes in with a project, or a developer comes in and says, I will build this subdivision, generally for us as local taxpayers, the cost is very little. There might be some local match, we might have to pay to upsize a pipe, but generally we're paying 5%, 10% of the total cost of the project. But all of that benefit, all of that new tax base, all that new growth, all of that new revenue goes to our city, goes to us. It becomes a way that we can finance things that we want within the community. The catch is that the public agrees to maintain the improvement forever. We agree at the local level that we will take on the liability long-term of maintaining that sewer pipe, that water system, that water tower, that treatment plant, that sidewalk, that road, that street. If you think this through over multiple life cycles, in other words, we're 60 years into this experiment, if you think it through over a much longer period of time, the only way that this strategy makes any sense is if one of these two assumptions are true. Either growth is going to continue at ever-accelerating rates. In other words, we're always going to be able to generate that much more growth. And that much more growth will create that new cash flow that we need to rob Peter to pay Paul that we promised to 60 years ago. Or the pattern of development, the way we actually build and lay out our places, is going to generate more revenue and wealth than it generates in cost over the long term. Now, around the country, and I know here in this region as well, there was a period of time where we thought that number one was true, right? It felt like growth was always going to continue, it was always going to accelerate. All of our budgets, all of our projections were based on this kind of eternal growth. And I think we all realize now that number one is not a valid assumption. Unfortunately, number two is also not a valid assumption. And this is where this presentation is going to get a little bit technical for a short period of time. If I go too fast or if I say something that doesn't make sense, raise your hand and we'll talk about it a little more thoroughly. I am personally obsessive about clean, real-world models. I don't like theoretical numbers. I'm allergic to studies that try to quote all these trends and correlations. I like real-world examples, and the cleaner the better. And so what we've done kind of obsessively, and I'm going to share a few of these with you, is go out and look at real developments, the real finances of them, and say, what are the actual numbers in this development? I'm going to start with the most simple. This is a dead-end road with a cul-de-sac. You can see the lots along here. They're roughly 2.5-acre lots. The road goes here, and then dead ends at the end. The only infrastructure along this in this area is just this one dead-end road. It was originally put in as a gravel road. The city took it over. The city had a policy that all the roads in the city should be paved. And so the city went out and paved it. They paid half, and the property owners in this development paid the other half. The cost was $6,600 per property. We looked at the amount of taxes being paid by the people that live within this development. Now understand, the only people using this road are the people that live here. There's no through traffic, there's no commercial traffic, there's nothing been upside in future development. It's just the people that live there, and that's all it will ever be. It would take the city, based on the current taxes they're receiving from the people in this development, 37 years just to pay off the half that they paid to build the road in the first place. And that road's not going to last 37 years. Yet it's going to take the city 37 years of collecting taxes just to get back what they spent. This is a more kind of suburban style of development. These are like half-acre, three-quarter-acre lots. There's some larger lots over here. But you can see they've got limited frontage. Again, closed-loop system. There's no through traffic here. There's no commercial traffic. This is just a residential subdivision. You've got a loop right here and then a dead-end cul-de-sac. There's nobody using this except the people that live there. This was built in the early 1980s, and it completely fallen apart, and the city went out and fixed it. The cost was $354,000. We asked the question, okay, based on the taxes the city is collecting from the people utilizing this road, how long is it going to take them to recoup what they just spent fixing the road? The answer is 79 years. We then asked the question, okay, let's pretend that the city wanted to collect enough money where they could have money to fix the road before the road fell apart again. What would that mean? It would mean an immediate 46% increase in taxes and annual increases of 3% over inflation every year for the next 25 years, with every penny going just to pay for the road. You can think of this one as a gated community. This is a private road. There's no actual gate, but it's a private road with a dead end here. These are some very high-end lake properties. These property owners couldn't agree on who was going to maintain the road and how they were going to do it. So they signed a petition and said to the city, we'll pay to bring it up to your standard if you agree to take it over. And of course, almost every city in the country will do that exchange. That's exactly this city's policy. That's pretty much every city's policy. We'll take over the infrastructure if you bring it up to the city's standards. I was actually at this meeting, and one of the council members said, wow, we get a free road. So we asked the question, how free is this free road? The cost would be 100% paid by them to build it, but the long-term maintenance then becomes a public obligation. We sat down and based on the engineer's numbers for building this road, calculated that when it fell apart in 25 years, it would cost $154,000 to fix. Between now and then, the city was only going to collect $79,000 in taxes. To break even, in other words, to collect enough money from these property owners to actually fix their road when it fell apart, they would need to increase taxes today by 25%, and then annually 3% over inflation every year for the next 25 years, with all that road going, or all that money going just to maintain the road. Now sometimes people say, okay Chuck, we get it, we lose money on residential property, we make it up on commercial. Commercial is our cash cow, right? And my first response is always, well, I don't know any corporation that loses money on 90% of their transactions and makes it up on the last 10. I don't know why an incorporated municipality would seek to operate that way, but nonetheless, some of us have this idea that commercial property is where we make up our money. This is a rural business park. These are like 2-acre rural lots. There's 25 of them here. 2 of them had developed. The city went to their economic development team, their city planner and their city engineer, and said, we want to get things going in this park. What do we do to kind of induce demand and get private sector investment going in this park? And the 3 professionals, opened up their toolbox, looked inside, saw that they really only had one tool, and they came back and said, we need to spend $2 million running utilities up there, because utilities will attract private sector investment. It costs $1.9 million for 25 lots, that's $76,000 per lot. We asked the question, okay, let's pretend that this thing was wildly successful, and that the entire thing developed within 12 months, and the city didn't have to do any subsidies or anything, they just came running because now we had water and sewer. What type of private sector investment would we need to have that pay off? And the answer is $8 million. $8 million on a per lot basis is 3 times the current investment that they're getting out there. If it takes them 10 or 15 years to phase this in, which I still think is optimistic, that number jumps up to be over 30 million, a completely unrealistic number. There's another development. This is a business park. This is an industrial park that was built in the mid-1990s. It's completely built out. Every lot is developed. The city felt that this was so successful of a project that they actually want to repeat it on property they own just adjacent. They actually are just going to mirror it, so do a mirror image, the exact same development. We asked the question, okay, if we could do this exact same development at the exact same cost and get the exact same level of investment, is that a good project? The cost is $2.1 million in inflation-adjusted dollars, so today it would cost $2.1 million. The level of investment we can look and see because it's there. It's created $6.6 million of private sector investment. Now, I have to pause here. Of that $6.6 million, 4 of those lots are a church. I go to church. Churches are an important part of the community, but the church is not paying any taxes to the city. 2 of the lots are a school bus maintenance facility. Again, I have children in school, I went to school, we ride the bus. School buses are important, but the school district is not paying any taxes to the city. One of the lots is a county maintenance garage, and one of the lots is a city maintenance garage. Of the remaining lots, the ones that are theoretically private sector taxpayers, every single one was either sold for $1 and or received a long-term tax subsidy in order to attract the business to the park. For the sake of our analysis, we assumed the entire new park would develop within 12 months, and that every single development that came to this new park would be a full taxpayer with no subsidy. If that were the case, it would take the city almost 3 decades, 29 years, in order to retire that debt. That's 29 years of everybody else's taxes in town going up to pay to plow the snow off the street, maintain the ditches, sweep the roads, provide fire protection, sewer protection, police protection, every other service that would be needed in this park. Because in the most wildly optimistic scenario, it takes them 3 decades just to service their own debt. This is what this looks like from a cash flow standpoint. And let me walk you through this. Let's pretend that a developer comes to town. The developer says, I would like to build this new development. I'm not asking for any subsidies. I'm not asking for any variances. I'll meet all your rules. I just want to go out and build it. And then after I'm done, I will donate the infrastructure to the city, and you get all this new development and the new infrastructure. We would say, yeah, that's a great deal. We spend nothing. We get all this back. This is a great exchange for us. But let's say, we had heard about this strong town stuff, and we want to be prudent, and so we weren't planning on this new development. What we're going to do is we're going to take of that new revenue coming in that wasn't expected. We're going to take the portion that would normally go to maintain infrastructure, and we're going to set it aside. And every year when that money comes in, we're going to set it aside and let that pot grow. And then when we get to the end, when the infrastructure has to be fixed, we'll go out and take that money and fix it. This is what would happen. In year one, stuff is just donated, it's brand new. You get a little bit more tax revenue come in, and you put that aside. In year two, you get the same amount, you add to it. In year three, you add to it. And every year, you're adding new tax revenue. The infrastructure is all new. It's not costing you anything. You don't have to go out and, repave the road or fix the sewer pipe. It's all brand new stuff. And so the decades go by, and you've got quite a bit of money in the bank. The problem is in year 25, when you have to go out and actually fix something, what you find is that the cumulative amount of money that you brought in is not sufficient, and your cash flow goes far into the negative. Now, let's pretend that that developer comes back 2 years later and says, look, that development worked for you, it worked for me. I would like to go out and do a similar scale of development. In fact, I would like to do every other year a similar scale development, just forever. And so in year one, you have a new development come in. In year three, you have another development. In year 5, in year 7. This is a steady growth scenario. This is what every city would love to have. Continual, nice, moderate levels of growth, right? And let's say we did the same thing. We put the money out to the side and used it for the day we had to go make good on these obligations. What you see is that, in year 1, you have the same. Year 3, you've now got 2 developments paying. Year 5, you've now got 3, and so on and so on. And it continues to grow. And what you see is that your cash actually starts to kind of accelerate upwards. You get this kind of upward curvature to it because you're adding all these new developments. Over time, you've got all this new growth. And in year 25, when you have to go out and fix the development that went in 25 years ago, it's okay. I mean, you've got to spend some money, but it's not a big deal. You've got it, right? Because you've had all of this growth. This is what we call the illusion of prosperity. Because, of course, we all understand that when you lose money on every transaction, you don't ultimately make it up in volume. When you lose money on every development that you do, the further you go out into the life cycle, the more downward pressure there is on your budget. Now, we started this whole conversation by saying this is a very young experiment, right? 60 years. And I've had people stand up at this point and say, well, Chuck, what you're showing us here, you're showing us 50 years, we should have gone broke a long time ago. How did we get this far without, having to deal with this insolvency issue? And the reality is, we did deal with it. Here's what we did. Everybody is familiar to one degree or another with the narrative about our public sector debt, right? Our public sector debt is enormous, trillions of dollars. I've had 7 quarters of calculus. I'm not going to pretend that I can comprehend, let alone explain what $1 trillion is, right? It's an unfathomable sum. I like to tell people when I was in grade school, we had a weekly reader. You guys had a weekly reader now? I remember the weekly reader once had this little breakup box where it said, if you took the national debt and turned it into dollar bills and stacked them on top of each other, it would go to the moon and back 22 times. As if for a 4th grader, replacing one abstract concept with another abstract concept would clarify. We all know that the national debt is this enormous sum of money, right? This blue line is our public sector debt, that enormous, huge number. This black one is our GDP. This green line, the one that soars up like this, That's our private sector debt. That's debt that you and I share. That's home mortgages, commercial real estate loans, auto loans, credit cards, margin interest accounts, student loans. That's private sector debt. The way we financed the first generation of this experiment was by using our savings and investment, and then reinvesting that cash we got from the early development back into this pattern. And when it started to slow down, it started to not work, our economy started to sputter, we switched from an economy based on growth through savings and investment to an economy based on growth through debt accumulation. And you can see, as we cross over into the third life cycle of this experiment, that the growth became so important that we actually allowed it to become predatory. We actually allowed devices to develop within our system that induced people who couldn't afford homes to buy homes, and people who could afford modest homes to buy large homes, and people who could afford large homes to buy multiple large homes. Our ability to continue this experiment based on the private sector taking on more and more debt is just not there. Obviously, there's some serious implications to all this. The mechanisms of growth, the way we become accustomed to growing, are waning. The federal and state government do not have the money to pump into our local cities to help them grow. The DOTs are functionally broke. No one knows that better than you do here in the Atlanta area. We have far more liabilities from a DOT standpoint than we have anywhere near revenue streams. The private sector has no capacity to continue to take on exponentially increasing levels of debt. This means that local governments are going to be forced to absorb the cost of the current development pattern. If we want that road fixed, we're going to have to pay for it. If we want that pipe repaired, that's going to come out of our budget. If we want that new water tower or that new civic building or whatever it is, we're going to have to find a way to do that locally. This can't be done in the current pattern of development without large tax increases and or large cuts in services. Now, I didn't come here from Minnesota to tell you what you already know, right? The debate we're having at every level of government across this entire country is the same. How much do we increase taxes and who's going to pay for that? How much do we reduce spending and where should that reduction be made? It is critical at the local level that we see the third variable in that sentence. The third variable being the current pattern of development. As long as we continue to build places that are functionally insolvent, there is no amount of tax increase and there's no amount of service cut that can make up for that. As long as we continue to build places that over the long term are going to cost us more to sustain than we're going to get cumulatively in wealth, there's no way our cities can avoid going bankrupt. We literally need to address the productivity equation in our cities. So what do we do? I had to put this slide in. Yeah.
When you're looking at the revenue side, are you strictly looking at property taxes, or is there any other source of local revenue that you're kind of factoring in?
It's interesting because the question was, am I just looking at property taxes? And when I say I like clean models, these are clean models that just have property tax. So these are in situations where the only revenue stream associated with them was property tax. But we've done other ones around the country where there's some more complexity. Every state, every region of the country has different ways that the revenue equation is built out. I was in Albuquerque a while back, and Albuquerque uses just sales tax, no property tax. I'm like, well, why would you ever have a house? Why don't you just build all Walmarts? Why would you ever have a house? It doesn't make any sense. So every city is a little bit different. These examples that I've gone through tonight are based on a property tax system. But there's certainly complexities.
Right, so other models that factor in all of the other revenue sources still come up with the same.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I had to put this slide in because I would get to, I would spend the rest of the talk talking about things that we need to do. And at the end when we get to Q&A, someone would always stand up and say, Chuck, you've made me really mad. You've told us all these terrible things, and then you've not given us a solution. What is the solution? And after hearing this like a dozen times, I'm thinking, what am I not getting? Because I'm talking about what we need to do, but yet I'm still getting this question. It occurred to me, and what I realized is that what I was being asked was not what I was hearing. What I was hearing was, what's the solution? What was being asked is this: what can someone else change about what they're doing so that I don't have to change anything about what I'm doing? I don't have that solution. And if that's the bar of what a solution is, I don't have it. I don't think there is. What we've done is we've created a complex set of problems that we're going to have to be faced with these challenges for a long time. And we're going to have to find ways to start to rationally respond to them. I don't think there is a solution in the classical sense, like we make this policy shift and now it's solved. We're going to be dealing with the ramifications of this experiment for a long, long time. And we're going to go through a readjustment to get to some state of equilibrium. What I'm going to talk about for the rest of this time are some of the things that we can do. And I like to start with this photo. I use this one already, but it is one of my favorite photos. This is my hometown in 1900. I live 2.5 hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul. It is out in the country today. Back then, this was the middle of nowhere, right? This was multiple days' journey from any place that would be considered cosmopolitan, right? This was the middle of nowhere. These were a bunch of illiterate, uneducated lumberjacks, right? In the middle of the North Woods of Minnesota. Look at the place they built. And as a planner, as an engineer, I look at this and I see all kinds of just amazing things. I mean, this architecture is fantastic. The way that they frame the public realm, the way that it's segmented, the spacing between the buildings. This is just a spectacular, spectacular place. Let me ask you some questions about this. How thick was their zoning code? How many commissions did you have to go through to get a permit? How many building inspectors and code officials did they have? How many economic development programs? How many grants from the state? These people didn't even have 30-year mortgages. Yet they built a place that, by any standard, was pretty spectacular. And most importantly, there was nothing propping this place up. This place is financially strong and resilient. How do they know how to do this? It's really simple. It's really simple. They just copied what they knew worked, right? The cultural knowledge they had on how to build a place was based on thousands of years of accumulated wisdom, trial and error wisdom, that taught them this is how you build a place. When you build a building, you put it up to the line. When you create it, you put symmetry in the building. You put your door up front. You make your windows a certain size. This was cultural knowledge. When you build a strip mall or a big box store, what do? Well, you put the parking lot in front. You stripe it a certain way. I mean, we don't need codes to tell people to do this. They just do it because culturally that's what we do. When there's congestion, what do? We put a third lane in. When there's cross traffic, we put in a signal. We all culturally know how to build the crap we build today. These guys culturally knew how to build fantastic, resilient places. There is so much we can learn from what they did and the knowledge that they accumulated over thousands and thousands of years. It essentially lost knowledge today. Incidentally, this is what the street now looks like. Yeah, I always get that reaction, like groans. If you want to understand in a nutshell why we are broke as a country, there's $500,000 of infrastructure in that street right there. And the return we get on that investment is, a couple of vacant buildings and some parking. I was giving this talk once, and I had someone stand up and say, wow, you just explained something to me. I'm from Costa Rica. And I couldn't understand why I would get here, and there were all these gaps everywhere. We're a very poor country in Costa Rica. And so when we get to a city, we can't have gaps between buildings. We can't afford that. We have to fill all those places in and make them work. And you just explained to me why you have all these gaps. I never got that before. And if you think that through, you realize, we're not that rich either. We can't afford this either. We just had the luxury of feeling rich, that illusion of prosperity, for a long, long time. At Strong Towns, we have 4 areas we're focusing on to try to help communities deal with this. The first one is to build cultural awareness. That's a lot of what our Curbside Chat program is. Muster Social Capital is a lot of what you are doing here with the Roswell Next. Getting people out, getting them active, helping them take ownership of the community. We need to restructure economically, and we need to reorient government. And it's this last one that I'm going to spend some time talking about here now. Build it and they will come is a fantastic movie plot. It is a terrible development strategy, especially for a city. And when we take on obligations and liabilities, even when the developer goes out and pays the cost of putting this in, we are essentially gambling that these things will work out. And of course, you have, like every place else, a certain number of zombie subdivisions because we've gotten ahead of ourselves. We're chasing this growth. These things would never, ever, ever have happened 100 years ago. Our ancestors never built in a build it and they will come fashion. They built things incrementally over time. This is Front Street in my hometown. You can see, this is a collection of like pop-up little buildings. This is a billiard hall. This is restaurants right here. I'm sure there was a brothel up the street somewhere. You had all the little things that a lumberjack town in the middle of nowhere would have. You can see that there wasn't a lot of investment put into these places. They literally went out and planed the wood, popped up the shops. They might have imported a little bit of glass and a little bit of ironwork, but pretty much they just, built with what they had. It was a small little investment, a small little increment. But the place was successful. And this exact same street 30 years later was the one we looked at earlier, right? In 30 years, we went from here to here. We didn't do it with some big top-down investment. We didn't do it with some huge federal grant. We did it with all these small little people working in their own individual way on this broad framework incrementally over time. They made small, tiny little improvements that cumulatively added up to something really spectacular. Of course, 40 years later, as this city continued to grow incrementally and prosper, you had streets that started to look like this. This is the same street 40 years later. The little shacks replaced by 2- and 3-story wood buildings, now replaced by 2- and 3-story rock and brick and granite facade structures. We didn't do build it and they will come. We didn't try huge transformative investments. We didn't have the capacity to do that. What we did were small little increments over a broad scale over a long period of time. And when you do that, what you see is, yes, from a strictly engineering standpoint, from a strict economist standpoint, it's not as efficient. If I could go out and build 10 miles of road and 10 miles of pipe and then hook people up over time, I can lower my per unit cost and it's efficient. But these people didn't have the cash to take that kind of risk. They had to build slowly, incrementally, and in a resilient, financially resilient way. That's who we are today, too. So the first things we need to do to reorient government is to adopt a banker mentality. Most government investments need to be secure and essentially risk-free. If you've ever had a business that you wanted to start or something that you needed a loan from a bank for, you go in, what do they ask you for? What's the collateral, right? What's going to back up this loan? If you go to the bank and say, I want $500,000 to go start this business, it's an internet online business, but it's a great idea. They're going to laugh at you, right? Unless you have $500,000 sitting in the bank, or $500,000 of collateral, or $500,000 something that you can give them, they're not going to give you anywhere near that money. They don't lose money. As cities, we have to have the mentality that we're also not going to lose money. We're not going to invest in things. From a capital standpoint now, I'm talking about our infrastructure. We're not going to invest in infrastructure where we're not going to get cash back to sustain it. I'm not saying that cities should only be stingy bankers. I'm saying that most government investments need to be secure and risk-free. But we do need to do some speculative investment. There is room in local government for speculative investment. And I'm going to show you at the end what some of those are. But they're small and they're experimental. A venture capital. If 95% of our investments are banker mentality and 5% are venture capital, as I'm going to show you here at the end of the presentation, we will start to, again, become financially viable. Now let me show you what return on investment means. This is kind of how projects are sold today. And once you kind of see this and start to look at it in your own newspapers and your own reporting, you'll see that this is the way projects are reported everywhere around the country. They'll say, well, we're going to invest $1 million. This project is going to cost the city or the state or whoever $1 million. It's going to create jobs, create new growth and tax base, and that's going to have a value of $4 million. It's going to be $1 million invested and $4 million of economic growth is going to happen. And we look at this and we say, wow, that's a great cost-benefit analysis. You spend 1, you get 4 back. And it's literally reported that way. You can read like federal cost-benefit analyses and all kinds of things. And they'll say this exact thing. We spend $1, we get $4 back. Right? There's a problem, though, that we're not quite grasping. We're not telling ourselves the full story. Where does that dollar come from? That dollar comes from the government. It's a collection of our tax dollars that is being spent on the project. Where does this economic activity happen? It's happening in the private sector. Now, I'm a private sector guy. I tend to be a small government, private sector first kind of person, right? But the reality is, if government is spending $1 to generate $4 of private sector development, that's a great little trick. But it's only going to be a valid economic development strategy for us as a people if the government is actually collecting the money back, right? How much of that money actually flows back to repeat this one little trick over and over again? If we at the local government level want to stay solvent, we have to measure the real return on investment. We actually have to measure what that is. How much money do we get back in our pockets, cash, versus how much cash we spend? The economic activity is awesome, but this is a pretty easy trick. This one, much more complicated. But if we don't do this one, we're going to be broke. We also need to account for the second life cycle. And this is such an obvious point, but it's one that we just, it's incredible that we never do this. I was actually taught in engineering school. This is a main engineering economic analysis. I was taught how to do economic analysis in engineering school. You have a bunch of different ways to do it, but essentially what you're doing is comparing one project to another, and kind of the easiest way is to put it in like present value. So you say this project costs this much today, annually costs this much, and when we get to the end, there's a salvage value. We can scrap the parts and do whatever, and so then you take all that and you put it into a present value. And you compare that to other projects. It's a way to do an apples-to-apples comparison. The problem is that works if you're Walmart. And at the end of 12, 15 years, you can say, well, this store isn't that great. A store up the road is a little bit better. We're going to salvage this one. We'll strip out the lights. We'll take out anything of value. We'll board it up, and then we'll build up the road, right? This is a valid calculation if you're Walmart. If you're a city, it doesn't work that way. We don't get to, after 20 years, look and say, that was a dumb development. We're not getting the money we thought we'd get. We're just going to dig that up and abandon it. We're just going to walk away because this one doesn't make much sense. We're stuck with it. And so because we're stuck with it, we have to have a different calculation. When we look at the first life cycle and we put together a project, if we go out and get, and I'm sorry, I forgot, I kept my flag in there. If we go out and get federal money and state money, and then we go get a private sector developer, and then the city kicks a little bit in, that's like a great project, right? I've been on interview committees for city administrators, and one of the questions is asked is like, how good are you at putting projects together? Give us an example of a project where you've been able to bring a lot of partners to the table to get something done. And we place a high value on people that are capable of pulling these things off, right? The problem is the second life cycle is much different. In the second life cycle, the federal government's not going to come in and help us maintain that street. The federal government doesn't do maintenance. The state is not interested in coming in and fixing a pipe in the middle of our road. The private sector is not going to pay twice for the same thing. They're paying taxes. They expect you to maintain the stuff. That's why they're paying taxes. So what you find is when we get to the second life cycle, who's left? You know, Mayor Clinton. It's us. Right? If you think that through, what you understand is that the growth that we get in the first life cycle has to be sufficient enough to offset all of these funding sources when you get to the second life cycle. If we don't take that into account, we're not going to be, you know, accurately reflecting the long-term obligation that we're taking on. So a cash flow analysis is not sufficient. At the local government level, when we're doing public projects, we need to account for the second life cycle. We also need to start understanding what a high return investment is. These are two identical blocks in my hometown. The one on the left we've called old and blighted, the one on the right we've called shiny and new. They're the exact same size, they abut the exact same road, they abut the exact same neighborhood, they have the exact same amount of public infrastructure. Everything about them is the same except for the style of development. The old and blighted block looks like this. It is run down, decrepit, it is kind of the worst commercial block in town. You've got a pawn shop, a bail bonds, a couple liquor stores. You know, this is not a great block. The shiny and new block used to look just like this, but the city's plans, the city's ordinances call for it to be torn down and rebuilt in this style here. It's a drive-through taco joint. Now, everybody was thrilled with this development. Everybody thought this was fantastic because not only did we get rid of this block of blight, right? But at the end of the day, this met all of our codes. It met the floor area ratio, it met the parking ratio, the sign was the right size, the engineer was thrilled because there's no traffic here, it all comes up the side. The environmental people actually were happy because they convinced Taco John's to put native shrubs in the stormwater area. Even the complete streets people were happy because they got them to put in a sidewalk. You know, it ends right there, but there's a sidewalk there. So everybody was thrilled with this project. Here's the problem that nobody stopped to consider. If you look at the total tax base of that old and blighted block, it's $1.1 million. If you look at that shiny and new block, the same area, the same neighborhood, the same infrastructure, the same everything, just a different style of development, it has a total value of only $800,000. The old and blighted block, in its decrepit, rundown condition, is 42% more valuable than this, you know, on its wedding day, right? I mean, it's never going to look nicer than that right there, right? We all know the trajectory of the taco joint. You know, 20 years from now, it will be a used car lot when a new taco joint goes in on the edge of town. And then 10 years after that, it will be boarded up and be a meth lab. And then, you know, at some point, so we all know, you know, this is never going to become more valuable than that. This, on the other hand, we literally can't make any less valuable. There's hardly anything we could do to drive down the value of that any further than it is. Our ancestors understood, not because they were geniuses, but because they did it for thousands of years, how to build places that retained and created value. If you go to the edge of town and you look at the things we are doing today in this model to try to create wealth, you get something like this. This is the Mills Fleet Farm property in my hometown. Oh, you guys don't know what the Mills Fleet Farm is, do you? Mills Fleet Farm is like a Midwestern regional big box store. If you think tires, lumber, fishing tackle, camouflage lingerie. That's the realm of products you get at Mills Fleet Farm, right? Wildly successful place. This was so successful they doubled the size of the store. They actually do have a women's lingerie department that is full of camouflage products. This is an auto dealership and then a gas station. So this complex here is the most significant private sector investment in the region that I live, right? That site, that 13-acre site, is the highest single property from a tax value standpoint that we have. The value is $0.6 million per acre. Okay, so we're talking a lot of money. This place is worth a lot, and we would, bend over backwards and do whatever we could to get another one of these. In fact, when the Mills people come to a city council meeting, we stop the city council meeting and ask the Mills people what they want, right? We took the same exact size, the same area, 13 acres, and we overlaid it in the rundown downtown that we have. Now, the downtown is a decrepit place. In my entire lifetime, the only development that's happened there has been by fire. So, when I was in junior high, these lots burned down, and now it's not parking. When I was in high school, this one burned down, it's now parking. When I was in college, this one burned down, it's now parking. So what our development strategy has been my entire life is to let buildings burn down and then convert them into parking. That was the highest and best use. Here's the kicker though. When you look at this area, the same exact amount of land area, okay, as this, but a different style of development. It has a value of $1.1 million per acre, 78% greater. Now think of this in terms of long-term resilience, right? One property. Mills is, I don't want to say anything bad about Mills. They're a great company. Their home is my hometown. They're actually from there. They, do a lot in the community. But it's not unimaginable to think that over the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years, that the Mills enterprise could, suffer competition and go out of business. I mean, it's not unheard of. This is a regional big box retailer. It is conceivable that this store could be bought out by a Walmart and closed down, so the Walmart up the road can have more business. This is something that is done. Car dealerships, they come and go all the time. Same with gas. I mean, there's like 15 gas stations in about a mile here. What happens if this goes away? We're done, right? How about this place here? As run down and decrepit as this is, in this 13 acres, there's 134 different properties. If one of them goes out of business, what happens? It becomes an opportunity for someone else, right? Let me ask you, you look at something else. Let's say that, we walk away from this meeting tonight and we realize, okay, the most important thing in our city is not growth, but productivity. We need to increase the financial productivity of our places. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have a goal of, we're not going to build any more infrastructure, any more streets, none of that, no more horizontal expansion. What we're going to do is going to make what we have more financially productive. And we're going to have a goal to double the value of our properties throughout the city. What's your plan to double the value of that? Now there's some brilliant people working on this, right? Brilliant people. It's sprawl retrofit. Scott and I know some of these people personally. They will say, well, we're going to go in here and cut a swath through this, and we'll make it put storefronts along it, make it a walkable street. We'll rip this down, make an urban village out of it. We'll convert this to a community center. They would have like elaborate plans that would cost millions and millions of dollars to do. The problem is we're broke. We don't have millions and millions of dollars to transform these. And the vast, vast majority of them will never be transformed. If we're going to double the value of this, what do? You don't need an expert to tell you what to do there. I mean, literally, you could sweep the sidewalks. That would help. You could paint some buildings. You could clean out the meth labs. You could take the places where buildings have come down and actually have the city sell that property back into the marketplace so that something could be built on it. There are so many strategies that we can do that cost like $0 or very little money. This is a development pattern that has a very high upside and limited downside. This is an approach to development that has a limited upside and a downside that can literally go to zero. do we ring value?
General question. Would you prefer comments or in the middle? Or would you like to kind of observe them? But, you know, you want me to sort of ask a question about?
Go ahead.
Okay. But for a business owner that would maybe looking to sort of relocate, it would be much less attractive to sort of move into an investment, you know, that place over there as opposed to one that's sort of shinier and new. So, I'm just wondering how to maybe overcome about maybe the incentives.
It's tougher to get someone to move
Well,
here
to a
than
place,
here.
well, or not, I think that's not really a great place, but it seems to me that I would prefer not to start my business.
This is run down. I don't want to be part of what's going on.
Kind of, yeah.
I would rather be, you know, in a lot near this, right?
Right.
I totally get that. I mean, and that's part of the momentum. Here's what you have to, I think, kind of look at from a public standpoint. How much did this cost us to build? Like, literally, my great-great-grandparents built this. And all we had to do is maintain it. How much did this cost us to build? Well, the state spent $120 million on this highway. And then, you know, built frontage roads all along it and lights to screw it up, right? So we could get development. The city spent $35 million running sewer and water out to the highway corridor. The city spent millions of dollars on these roads. The county spent, you know, multiple millions on these roads. I get what you're saying. If we make this like really, really attractive by pouring all of the wealth generated off of this into this, this is going to decline in value and attractiveness. And this is going to look like a really good deal. It's a function of where we've chosen to spend our money.
Right. So that stops, so I'm not going to move over there.
Right.
Since as long as there are governments that are still
Right.
doing that, I'm going to move.
Yeah, as long as we steal money from here and spend it to prop this up, this is going to be in a rational marketplace of people. This is going to be the place that I want to go build. Okay, let's go through these. When I talk about the traditional development pattern and what our ancestors kind of intuitively understood, they knew how to build places that generated value. And when they made investments, every investment they made was made under the guise of how do we maximize the value of this investment. So this is our county government building. We built this building back in 28 or something like that. You can look at it and see, you know, we built this in kind of a classical architecture style. It's a big, imposing building. We built it on the end of one of the major streets, so it terminated, you know, it's the end view of that street. We didn't do it because that was the cheapest property. We didn't do it because, you know, someone gave that property to the city. We didn't do it because we were vain. We did it because if you put a big, magnificent building like that in that location, it would reflect value throughout all the neighborhoods that there was. If you look at a great building like a radio tower like radiates radio waves, a great building like this in the right location is going to radiate wealth and radiate value to all the buildings around it. So you could be 9 blocks away, walk out your front door, and the buildings going down the road would form a picture frame of which the picture was this grand public investment. We understood how to wring the most value out of everything we did. Unfortunately, we just built a new government center about 4 or 5 years ago. This is what it looks like. This is what it looks like from the other side. It's kind of a confused building. My young daughter actually asked me one day, "Dad, is that a Target?" I said, "No, it's not a Target." I actually drove her around the block then and said, "What do you think this building is?" And she said, "I think it's a church." So, you know, the 4-year-old mind realizes that this is a public building with some intrinsic value beyond just the brick and mortar, and that this is a functional building with no other intrinsic value. But beyond that, we did terminate one of the major streets in town with this new building too. Here's the old courthouse. It terminates the end of this street. Here's the new courthouse complex. It terminates the end of this street. The problem is that we did it with the loading docks and the dumpsters. No one thought about designing this to radiate value, to reflect any value to any adjacent properties. And so, this dumpy street is made even dumpier by now walking out your door and looking at this brick wall, the dumpsters over here, and the loading docks. We need to have a mentality of poor people again, so that when we make investments, we wring as much value out of them as we could. It would have cost us no more money to orient this building differently and have it be a value creation for our community as opposed to a value detraction. Incidentally, that's the same street. We keep going back to that street. That's the main street in town. That's the same one. Parks. You guys, I went and was at your River Walk Park today. It's just gorgeous. There's some beautiful parks in this community. Our ancestors understood intrinsically how to build great parks. Again, lumberjacks in the middle of the North Woods of Minnesota, right? What are we doing building reflecting pools, Roman columns? Who are these people building this stuff in a park, right? They did this because they understood that great parks reflect value on all the properties around them. These were parks that people walked through and were in every single day as part of their existence. And because of that, they took great pride and joy in them. They knew that these investments were going to be investments that were going to be reflected in the overall value of the community. If you look today at how we build parks, this is that same exact view, the same shot, literally the same place. A bunch of Arbor Day projects and, random mulch spread all over. This is a very sad place. Really, the only time people go here is once a year when they have the model car thing, which is kind of ironic because they go and park cars all over the park, and then people come to look at the cars, the old cars. Today we build parks to drive to. And because of that, they have value from a recreational standpoint, but they don't have value that they're reflecting to the community as a whole. They're not generating intrinsic property value increases the way they used to. There's a saying out of Silicon Valley, and this is going to get into our experimental venture capital mindset. Innovation that happens from the top down tends to be orderly but dumb, while innovation that happens from the bottom up tends to be chaotic but smart. This is a commentary on the systems that we build and how we go about driving innovation and change within our communities. Does anybody know where this is? This is Memphis, Tennessee. Nothing says Memphis like a pyramid, right? I've done a lot of work in Memphis, and if you look at a city that is desperate, Memphis is one. If you look at any statistic, Memphis and Detroit are always like 1, 2. Poverty, crime, out-of-wedlock births. You go down the list of kind of tragic statistics, and Memphis is right there. And don't think that Memphis has just accepted this. Memphis has done everything that they could to try to change this trajectory. They have invested in a beltway. When that didn't work, they built a second beltway. They have, torn down buildings for parking. They have subsidized businesses to stay. They've subsidized businesses to move in. They've built stadiums. This is actually a stadium that they built to try to attract a basketball team. They did get a basketball team, but they didn't want that stadium. They wanted a different stadium, so they helped build that stadium. This is now going to become a Bass Pro shop because they're paying Bass Pro to move there and move into it. They're doing everything they can in the old economy model to generate growth. They're doing everything that the experts tell them, this is how you do to change this trajectory. Let me show you a different idea. This is in Memphis as well. This is a little street called Broad Avenue. Some people that live near this street, own businesses on this street, were just fed up with the decline. They were fed up with the city not having the resources, not having the time, not having the capacity to come out and do anything to make their place work. And so they went out and they bought paint, and they, got a team together, and they painted their own crosswalks, they painted their own bike lanes, they painted their own parking lanes, they swept the streets, they fixed things up. They literally spent about $500 on paint. And at the end of a day, they had a transformed place, a different place than when they started. Here's the interesting thing about this. I was out here 6 months after this project and spoke with one of the landlords of the building, and they said the rent he was able to get, and incidentally, when the project started, there was lots of vacant storefronts. Today they're all full. And the rent this guy was able to get on the last place that rented was double what he was asking for before the project. A tiny, tiny investment, a venture capital investment, if you will, and huge return. Now, I can tell you what my city would do if we did this. If we went out and painted this, I'd have the city engineer out the next day saying, that's not up to spec. That line is crooked, someone's going to get hit, we can't have that kind of liability out here. This isn't going to work. And they'd be out with the pressure washers, getting rid of all that, right? Memphis is desperate. Memphis doesn't have pressure washers. They don't have the budget to go out and fix all these things. But Memphis is smart. And Memphis is doing some extraordinary things with this. The first thing they're doing is they're saying, wow, this worked. This worked. We don't want this to go backwards. And so we're going to take this very temporary painting that was put in, and we're going to make it permanent. We're going to go get some real high quality paint that will last a decade. We're going to go out and we're going to paint this in so this never goes away. And then we're going to look and step back and say, are there other blocks that are like this, where maybe we could do the same thing and have the same effect? In other words, here's an experiment that was done in a venture capital mentality that paid off. Can we learn from that experiment and export that to other parts of our community where maybe we could see different results? There's the same results. And if it didn't work, what are we at? A few $100 a paint? Not a big deal. Is there a way we could extend this a little bit? Maybe we can extend this out a couple other blocks in this other direction and pick up this other neighborhood. Maybe this road that's a block away has created a barrier between this neighborhood and the next. Maybe when we go in the next time and fix that road, we can change it to make it a little bit different so people can cross it. Memphis is actually taking this as a tiny experiment, something to learn from, that they can then apply to other places. A very little bit of money venture, a whole lot brought back. I said at the beginning that when I started the blog, there was a handful of people who were on the site and giving me a lot of feedback. Mike was one. This guy named George Linkert was another one. And while Mike was, a helpful guy, and you have your own blog, so you would write stuff and I would share your stuff, and we kind of... George had none of that. George was a pest. George would I would post something at 8 a.m. At 8:05, George would have a comment that was frustrating for me because I'm like, God, you're just not getting it. And he would say, Chuck, I'm looking at my city and what you're saying doesn't make sense. Explain this in a different way. Chuck, I'm not grasping what you're getting at here. Can you do this differently? Chuck, I don't think you've got this quite right. Explain this to me again. And, George was very sincere, but he was struggling to understand, but he wanted to get it. And I kind of developed, even though he was annoying, I developed kind of a soft spot for George. And George ultimately got my email address and would email me all the time. And then we became Facebook friends, and he would instant message me all day, George, And I'm like, okay, George, I'm trying to help you here. I found out the guy runs a daycare out of his house. He is a musician who's essentially doesn't have a musician job and is running this daycare. But he cared about his city and he was interested. After a couple years, he said, Chuck, I think I get it enough and I'm comfortable enough where I would like you to come and do a curbside chat presentation in my community. And I said, okay, it was a couple hours away. I drove down there. There's about 20 people that showed up. We had a presentation and a conversation, and then afterwards I went out to eat with George. And I remember sitting at the table saying, what am I doing with my life? I like this guy, he's a nice guy, but I'm trying to, change the world. Is my life just going to be about, this? Is this all I'm going to be able to accomplish? Is to help this, one guy who has all the right intentions, but like no capacity to help him do whatever. Well, 6 months after our curbside chat, George has signed up to be on the planning commission. In fact, he's been elected the chair. He started his own blog, writing about his community, looking at things, taking the stuff that he had got from us, and kind of applying it in his place. There'd be a development in for a new Walgreens, and he had actually, in his George way, taken and drawn in where he thought the parking lot should be and how the thing should be configured. He went and petitioned and came up with the new plan for the way that County Road was going to go through town, because they were repaving it, and pressured the county to change it. The newspaper was kind of impressed with his blog and gave him a regular column. He now writes every other week for the paper. He actually started like a neighborhood group. They meet at the coffee shop and they go out and do little projects in the town. They went out and planted some shrubs. They went out and swept up and cleaned up a lot. He has 2 kids that walk to school, and the walk is kind of dangerous. They actually went on the walk with them and tried to make some little improvements, like painted some stuff in and put a little barrier in one place to make the walk a little bit safer. George actually went to his city council and gave a curbside chat presentation. He actually called it the Curbside Chat. And he asked for my presentation. I gave it to him. Except when he gave it, he would have my slide, and then he'd have a slide from his city. And then he'd have my slide, and he'd have a slide from his city. It was the Curbside Chat for his city that I could never have given, right? But this guy did it. He put it together. And we were so inspired by what George had done. This, guy who really, in my, if we want to call it snob expert, perch from on high, looking at saying, am I wasting my time with this person who has no capacity? We realize that George is the answer. George is the guy who's going to change the world. And so we've come up now with this thing that we're calling Operation More George. How do we create an environment where the Georges of the world feel empowered to step forward, to take ownership of their community, to start to make change and be the change that needs to happen? Our first initiative has been actually in my hometown, Better Brainerd. We launched it this week. We had our kickoff event. It's funny because I speak all over the country to audiences large and small. I never get nervous. I was a nervous wreck at this event. It was horrible. You know how when you meet someone on the street that you don't really know and you start talking politics or religion and you don't agree with them, you walk away and think, well, that was interesting. But when you go to the family reunion and it's like your second uncle and you talk politics or religion with them and you want to wring the guy's neck. I'm in a room of my, close, everybody I live in a community with, and they're all sitting there staring at me what is this thing you're trying to do? A Better Brainerd is something we're trying out here in our hometown, and we're trying to literally export this approach, the George approach, across the country. You guys have your own thing going here. And I do think that the most important thing you can do is to have these non-governmental groups, these organizations of people, and keep stepping it up, keep empowering yourselves to do more, to take on more, and to really take ownership of your city. It's amazing to me. I actually got, what the city council said, called into the principal's office, because when I had our Better Brainerd kickoff meeting, the city council was mad that I didn't get approval from them. Even though I told them, look, I'm not asking for any money from you, I don't work for you, and, what's the deal? They wanted to make sure I wasn't going to, badmouth the city in any way. So they actually invited me to come to a council meeting and then quizzed me for 45 minutes on this. And I told them, if you're going to be a gatekeeper like this for everybody that steps up and wants to do something in the community, nobody's going to step up and take ownership. They're going to keep paying their taxes, and they're going to keep demanding that you solve all their problems. The reality is you can't solve all the problems. Only we can solve the problems. And so Operation More George, and I hope that you're Roswell next, is not just about getting together and having talks, and not just getting together and having parties, but actually getting together and saying, what can we do? Because we own this city. What can we do to solve problems? To finish up, The current path that cities are on is not financially stable. We've literally all drunk the same Kool-Aid. We've all built in the same way, in the same pattern. We've all done the same thing. And practically every city across this country is experiencing the same financial troubles. And our path that we're on is going to lead us further into that financial instability. The future for most cities is not going to resemble the recent past. There's this idea that if we get through this current economic difficulty, that we're going to go back to 2005. 2005 was a bubble. We're not going back to 2005. We're not going back to 1955. The beginning conditions of the new economy are vastly different than the beginning conditions of the old economy. And you can't take the last 60 years and just draw a trajectory out and say, that's where we're going. I don't know what the next 60 years is going to be, but it's not going to be a rerun of the last. And because of that, the main determinant of future prosperity will be the ability of local leaders to transform their communities. And by leaders, I don't mean the elected officials. We need great elected officials. We need them doing great things, and we need to support them. But we also need leaders. We need Georgians. We need people who are willing to step up and take ownership of their communities and work to make those incremental tiny changes that cumulatively over a broad area add up to something substantial. We have a book that we put out last year. I brought some copies with. They're heavy. I don't want to bring them home. If you want one, they're $10 each. It's some of the best essays from our blog. I say best in a very broad sense. We're not trying to make money off them. We're just trying to help get the word out. And if you're not someone who wants to sit and flip through 4 years of blog posts, you can get caught up to speed pretty quick with this. We also have this presentation in a book format. This is also $10. We formatted this for public officials. So you'll see that the words are big. There's a lot of syllables. It's pretty easy. There's a lot of pictures. You can get through this book in about 5 minutes, or you can spend about 3 hours with it, depending on how quickly you want to go through it. We do a blog at strongtowns.org 3 days a week. We actually have been doing 5 days a week for the last couple of months, but I only promised 3. We also do a podcast once a week, and we have a video channel where we upload a video once a week, looking at places and what's going on with them. If you're a reader, if you're a listener, if you're a viewer, we try to get you covered anyway. And then we have a site at strongtowns.net that is a social network for people that are working in their community to try to make change. It is a free place. We have like 700 people from around the country that are working to do things in their local communities to make them better. And if you want to meet with them and get ideas and talk about these things, strongtowns.net. Thank you so much for inviting me, for having me be part of your beginning of this great, hopefully long-running series you'll do for many, many years. If you guys have questions or want to make a comment, how much time do you think we got?
As long as anybody wants to say.
All right. Please.
One thing that jumped out in your presentation is, the taco shop versus the other.
Right.
The taco shop, a lot of that money, the big question here is how you connect the private sector back to the government. And the big difference between this, how much money is staying in the town? How many of these businesses that bring money in and keep it in the town versus the taco shop with Walmart? They suck money away from the people that leave the money in town. It goes to a store where they pay low wages and money leaves. Interesting thing in Roswell.
We actually studied that on the taco shop.
Well, you can see the point.
Yeah, totally.
And
Right.
that's what Roswell is doing now. When I was growing up, we used to stop in some of these houses in nice restaurants. You used to buy watermelons off the porch.
Yeah.
What they're doing is creating businesses here that attract people to come in. And these businesses, you look at them, most of them are businesses that bring money in and they stay here and they bring investment. Let me make another example. That's New York City versus, say, Atlanta or a lot of the other big towns. this neighborhood.
Right.
The way we have evolved, I think, in my lifetime, and what's disturbing is America is more and more monopolized,
Yes.
more and more centralized. In your city, for example, you have a paper mill. I used to sell that.
Seriously?
Yes.
We do. You used to sell paper.
Yeah, I was, company I was with. The problem that would happen, we had government regulations come in that made it more and more difficult
That paper
for
was
the paper
closed.
mill to survive.
Yeah.
One example I know is the Dioxin scare they had back in the 90s. Iron mills spent $35 million in equipment and set up this huge bureaucracy to meet this dioxin level, which was theoretical. In fact, this guy told me we spent $30 million, we used millions of gallons of water, 1 tablespoon a year of dioxin. Then they found out that that didn't matter after all. Well, that mill wound up having to merge with another mill by a big company. Some of you weren't sold that mill, you were going to some office in Richmond, talking to some guy that didn't really care, you had to cut your price. And some of these mills closed down, everyone in that town lost their jobs. When you were selling to a big company, you couldn't afford to keep the technical people.
Right.
See, I guess what I'm getting at is more and more the source of local money staying in a town is drying up and is moving to these more and more centralized places offshore. How would that affect the town? I think the direction Roswell has taken, if they could broaden that, and say a Walmart type store, another big store said, we're going to come in and set up a store in person. I think the first metric I have is, okay, you're going to be getting a lot of money from the citizens. How much of that's going to stay here?
Right.
Versus how much you can take out.
Right.
And that's the difference between the old town and the new one. Because all those old towns were businesses that stayed here,
Yeah.
you could make it an environment here for government and commercial, where I think you would have the town. Roswell's doing that.
It's interesting. I'm asked frequently if I will come to certain communities and help them fight Walmart. These people call me up and say, we'll pay you whatever you need for you to come and give your talk and say how bad Walmart is. And I never agree to do it. And it's because I look at Walmart a little bit differently. What you're talking about is import replacement. And import replacement is like a critical strategy for us at the local level. It's also important to understand what Walmart is, though. Walmart is a symptom of the system we have built. They are essentially, and you could call it and I hate to say Walmart. I've been at Target. Target's a Minnesota company. I mean, we can use any of the large scale, Walgreens, you know the deal. We can use any of them. But I get asked to fight Walmart all the time. I don't know why. I've never written anything about it on our blog, so I'm not sure why they call me. But Walmart is a symptom. They are essentially a parasite on the infrastructure that we have built. They are a natural reaction to the way we have reconfigured and retooled our communities. If you look at it, if you build a place where to get your daily things, you have to get in your car. In other words, you don't have a choice. At some point in your day, you have to get in your car. Then the business that will be the most competitive is the one that can offer you the most things in one spot. If you have a city configured where getting in your car is not the most convenient thing, you mentioned New York. New York is like a prime example where, like, literally it's inconvenient to get in my car. It's more convenient for me to walk to get to where I need to get things. All of a sudden, voila, what you see is that the market provides those options in that framework. So if we don't want the big box stores, or we don't want the national chains or what have you, we need to stop forcing everybody into a lifestyle where that's the most logical place to shop. And if we just stopped subsidizing that lifestyle, which is what we do today, and instead said we're going to build places that are productive, which when you start to look at productive places, they're financially productive. They're built in the traditional development pattern where you have walkable options and other things scaled to a different scale. What you find is that Walmart can be competitive there. McDonald's can be competitive there. but not in a city this size. You know, you have Walmart in Brooklyn. You know, you have McDonald's in New York because there's that much foot traffic out in front of you. But you know, we have the smallest city in the country with a McDonald's is in Garrison, Minnesota. Garrison, Minnesota is 320 people. They have a McDonald's. Why do they have a McDonald's? Because the highway has 40,000 cars a day. And it's a really crappy highway with stoplights and stop signs. So people, you know, are not going through fast. It's a perfect place for McDonald's. You screw up everybody's drive, and you got a lot of cars going through, and you screw up the drive. So now you got McDonald's. You know, is that economic development, or is that something that's actually making you worse off? Please.
Chuck, I think it's a great presentation. Thank you very much for coming today. One of the points that really stuck with me was the comparison between the Mills shopping center, or not shopping center, but big box store.
The big box store, right?
In comparison to downtown Brainerd. And I'm buying the point. I love the point. I'm actually originally from New York, so I get the walkable thing.
Sure.
You know, my wife and I lived there. We did not have a car because why would you, right?
Right.
I guess the problem, you know, I love the grid aspect. It's easy to get around, and I'm a big fan of that. My concern is in a situation like Brainerd and probably a bunch of other places, not unlike downtown Atlanta, which is a walkable place theoretically.
Right.
How do you suggest people get over? Because I understand the financial benefit, right? I think that we all do. The stigma, the idea that, like you said, this place burned down as a parking lot. This is a meth lab.
Right.
And that's what probably everyone in Brainerd thinks too.
Right,
You know? And if you polled everyone here right now, their opinions of downtown Atlanta as a place to be when the sun goes down.
Not very good. Right.
And better than it was.
Sure.
But what do you think about cities, you know, doing that investment to because there's probably going to be some kind of investment, I think, to overcome the stigma, and that's kind of hard to calculate on simply a tax basis.
I'm so glad you asked that, because here's there's two, to me, it's two prongs at the same simultaneously. One is to understand where the productivity is and to stop subsidizing development that is not productive. So if we can do that, if we can say, look, we're not going to take over that new subdivision on the edge of town, we're not going to let you put a new stoplight in, so you're going to have this like low value development and, you know, wreck the value of the road for transportation purposes. We're not going to pay to put in a frontage road. We're not going to subsidize this pattern of development any longer. That's like one half the strategy. The other half of the strategy is then not to say, okay, we need to transform, say, downtown Atlanta into, you know, something spectacular, you know, tomorrow or next week or over the next couple of years. But what we need to do is, like they're doing in Memphis, find the nodes where things are starting to work and do what you can in an incremental fashion to nudge that along, to start to bring that, you know, up incrementally over time. And then when you've got a node that's working, connect it to another node. Now you're starting to build on a framework of success. In other words, you're taking your places where things are starting to happen and you're nurturing them along.
Just to follow up real quick, sorry.
No, you're fine.
But it's a great point, I think, to apply to just maybe just a comment. Just a great point to apply here in Roswell, right where we are now.
Right.
Old Town Roswell, I guess we call it, is like the best, right? We all love coming down here, walkability. All you gotta do is find a parking spot. Once you do, you don't have to get back to your car until you're done with your own day, right? You can walk around and everything. But the problem is we go 2 miles, a mile up the road, you know, Holcomb Bridge Road is like the worst. And, you know, you get, like you said, you got a great model, and if there was only way if we could, you know, extend this model, I think it would be.
You have a beautiful model here. I mean, if you look, like what's working, this is working. It's financially the best stuff you've got. It's paying the most taxes. It's attracting the most people. Why wouldn't you just do more of that? I mean, it's successful. Just do it. You know, I mean, you don't even have to. You don't need an expert. You don't need to reinvent things. You just like look at what's working and say, how do we do more of that?